Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Cozy Corner. My name is Lee, and this is my library. So grab a mug of something yummy and settle in for some talk of books. Welcome to the part 2 of the duology that I decided to create on the best and worst books of 2021. If you didn't watch it already, I will put it up in the info button up here at the top of the best and most surprising books of 2021, but today we are going to be talking about the worst and most disappointing books I read during 2021. I do want to put a huge caveat at the beginning, because as someone who works hard to make a career for herself as an author, I am always conscious of the fact of being respectful of other people's writing, because I know the effort and dedication it takes to put something like that out. So please know that it is never from a place of jealousy or envy. It is always from a place of critique and taste. I think honestly is mostly what decides these things for me. So it could be an exceptionally well-written book that receives much aplomb, if you will. It's just not something that I enjoyed reading. So even if a book is in the quote-unquote worst category, it mostly means that I didn't enjoy it at all. It has nothing to do with the author. It has nothing to do with their life. It is strictly the work itself. So now that that caveat's out of the way, please know that I do respect all of these authors and I do not wish them any harm or anything. So please keep your comments polite and respectful. However, I am prepared to defend all of my opinions on these books, so feel free to debate away in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts as well. So, now that we've got the housekeeping stuff out of the way, let's get into the 5 worst books I read in 2021. Straight out the gate, we have one of the first books I read in the entire year, which was Last Memoria by Rachel Emma Shaw. This is an indie published book, which I didn't know until I was about halfway through reading it. Feel free to go watch, I think this is in my January, what I read in January video, to go watch my full length review, because I got into the meat of the issues that I had with this book. Suffice it to say, there were many, a grammatical editing error in here. There was some problematic material, particularly queer baiting. There was many plot holes. It was just a dissatisfying book to read. Overall, I think the story is an interesting concept. There is a girl who is tasked with taking memories from people for the purposes of political gain. She was like a slave soldier for the king, and then I think her brother goes missing. If I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, she's charged by the king to steal memories, and then there is this man whose name is Fallon. Serle is the main character, and there's this man whose name is Fallon who's missing memories, particularly memories of her. And so they meet up and are trying to put together their memories to figure out what's happening. That's about as good of an explanation as I can give, because even though it gives a rather concise summary on the back, it stayed true to that for like a third of the book, and then it just took a left turn and never really regained the momentum it had at the beginning. It was ultimately, I found myself being more distracted by what was wrong with it than what was actually happening in the story, which usually is a marking to me of, nope, this is not a good book. It was just not for me. There were too many problems with it for me to enjoy it, so that's why it's on this list. The next book we have is actually one that I checked out from the library, so I will include a picture here. It is The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. This follows the story of Lib, who is a nurse trained under Florence Nightingale, who is sent to look over or evaluate this child who, Anna, I think her name is, who is purported to be a miracle child, so someone who can survive without food or water. And Lib is charged to go care for her, but also to either prove that this miracle child exists or whether the whole thing is a hoax, which I think is a really interesting concept. And the author included a note at the end of the book saying that this was an actually like common thing that would happen as a way for families to make money or for people to get attention or fame. I had some big issues with Lib. I did not like her as a main character, and I think mostly because of her attitude towards Anna and her family. She, for most of the book, thought about them as idiots simply because they practiced a religion. She was incredibly insulting and demeaning, and never was that resolved. Lib is trained as a nurse, and so she's very science logic minded, which is fine. But that does not give you permission to treat everyone like idiots. And there was no character arc for her of even a willingness to understand why the family thought the way they did. And it wasn't just the family. That was how she viewed all of the people of faith in this particular area of Ireland. And that really put a sour taste in my mouth. Not that I'm opposed to differing opinions, just not ones that cause you to think less of other people simply because they believe something different than you do. So that made it really hard to read, and I couldn't find a redeemable quality in the main character, which was sad. I also thought the ending was a little lackluster. It resolved too nicely for something as dark as what happened in that book. There are several trigger warnings in that book, so again, go watch the review I did on YouTube, and I think you can also find it on Bookstagram, so that you're well aware of what you're getting into before you read it. It was incredibly dissatisfying, and I read it, I finished it, like I do most things, but I finished it knowing that I was much more turned off by the book than I was about anything that happened in it. So next, we have a controversial one. Like I said, my worst books tend to do with unresolved problematic material or taste. So it's never anything against the author at all. Just personally taste-based. I say that because one of the worst books I read in 2021 was Pride and Prejudice. And I can hear several of my friends from college crying in despair. I love Jane Austen, don't get me wrong. I think she's one of the greats, and she paved the way for so many people. Sense and Sensibility is my favorite Austen title. I think it'll always be that way. I put this as my worst book, one of my worst books of 2021, because I have read this now 7 times. And I am so tired of it. I don't like any character in this entire book. I really don't. Maybe Elizabeth sometimes, but I just, even Mr. Darcy in the movie depictions, which yes, he's yummy, but I just don't like them. They grate on my nerves, and it's so hard for me to be involved in the story when I'm not rooting for anyone in the story. So I am happy to report that I will most likely never read this again. I really hope. That is to say, the writing in here is exquisite. Yes, Jane Austen is a master at her craft. Please don't think that I'm trying to demean her in any way. I just don't like this book. Next, we actually have another classic on my worst books of 2021 list, and that is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. I read this, finished this several weeks ago. I want to say towards the beginning of December. Short synopsis, this is French Anna Karenina, just in case you were wondering. Very similar plot points, very similar ending in terms of type of ending, not method of ending. It really is French Anna Karenina. It is beautifully written. There are gorgeous descriptions in here. I love reading the Barnes & Noble Classics editions because they provide footnotes and commentary and information about the author. All of that is wonderful, and the story is incredibly well written. Again, I didn't like a single character in this story. I really disliked Emma, who is the main character. She is Madame Bovary. Oh, she just grated on my nerves. I didn't like anything about her. There isn't a character in here that I enjoyed reading about, and that really puts a drag on whether I enjoy a book. It was kind of a bear to get through. It took me a long time because I didn't like any of the characters. Like I said, the literature is exquisite, the writing is beautiful, and I think the history of this book is fascinating. It was one of those books where I didn't regret reading it because it's checking a classic off the list. I just wish that I would have either read it at a different time or maybe switched to the audiobook. But if I don't like the characters, then I have a hard time getting into what the story means. That being said, I did highlight and underline several things because while this is a narrative of a story, Gustave Flaubert provides lots of commentary on this style of writing, and the cultural implications of love and women in his time. So like I said, the purpose of the book I completely understood. And for a while I could escape from the characters and enjoy what I was reading, but when there is no protagonist or even an antagonist that I like, it's a no from me. And then the final book on my worst books of 2020 list is Wind from the Carolinas by Robert Wilder. I picked up this book as part of Around the World in 325 Days during my North America section. This is from the Bahamas, and it's one of those books where I feel very platonically about it. I don't know if that's a word. I didn't really have any huge issues with it. It just was kind of a dullard to read. I really had a hard time getting through it. That's mostly because this follows 8, I believe. Let me count on the map. 8, roughly 9 generations of one family when they emigrated from the US after the Revolutionary War to the Bahamas because their family were Southern loyalists and still dedicated to the crown in England, and the crown had promised their supporters land and titles if they supported them, and so they were given one in the Bahamas, which turned out to be more of a curse than a blessing, because even though the crown promised them these things, they did not promise their support. So they left wealth and ended up in poverty, and tried to make a agricultural life in the Bahamas, which did not work well for them. I have issues with, obviously, colonialism, particularly those who changed native islands' traditions and structure and economic status. That's why you'll never see me go on a tropical cruise, because the story of how those things happened are awful. So I have issues with the content in general, but this story was just a drag. It was completely flat. There was no exciting incident. The ending, it was just like running off a cliff and then nothing happened. There was no climax throughout any of this. Was it interesting to read? I guess. But this was the first book I read like this, where it is slice of life of one family over many years. I read several other books throughout the year that were like this, and I did not like them as well. This just happened to be the one that when I finished it, I was like, that was so much effort for one book, and I got nothing out of it. So it is a sort of quasi-classic that I am glad that I read, but 'twas not for me, ultimately. So those were the worst books of 2021. Again, more to do with taste than issues with the writing, except for the first one. But now, on to the most disappointing books of 2021. Again, most of these have to do with taste or were, because I do have a few that were more recently published, to me did not live up to the hype that they were given. And so the first one is In 5 Years by, In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle. This follows the story of Danny, who is set to marry this really awesome guy, but she goes to bed the night after she gets engaged and wakes up in a completely different life, in a relationship with a completely different man. And when she wakes up, she has to go back to her normal life with no clue of how to contact this man that she was in love with until she meets her best friend's boyfriend. And like I said, it's a very short book. It's just over 250 pages. I think this qualifies as magical realism, which is a genre that I struggle with. I've never been able to read magical realism well. I don't know why, but it's a genre that I have wrestled with for a long time. There were several other books that didn't make my disappointing list, but were also magical realism. They almost made it, but not quite. But this one had been hyped up a lot to me. It was part of the Elite Eight in Book March Madness, so I was kind of expecting it to be different. I don't know. I'm not sure I liked the ending. It took a strange left turn about halfway through the book. I think I had in my head just a different picture of the outcome of this story and how Danny and this mysterious man were going to find themselves again after the dream. It was a sad ending. A lot happened in 255 pages, but I just didn't connect with it as much as I thought I would. So if you did like this one, I would love to know your thoughts on it, because maybe it was more impactful for you than it was for me. The writing was beautiful. No issue with the content or the writing. It just was not, I guess, what I had thought it was going to be in my head. So the next three on my list I also don't have because they were library books. And the next one is a bit of a controversial one as well, and that is Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I started this, May, June. It was also part of the Elite Eight from Book March Madness. It wasn't necessarily from lack of wanting to read it, but this was I think the special edition for a certain anniversary that the book had gotten, and the introduction was full of background information on history and things like that pertaining to the Shire that Tolkien had included. And I was 2 pages into that before I realized I was horribly lost. I had no idea what he was talking about. It was definitely extra information for people who are dedicated to the world and had done research and knew exactly what he was writing about. It was not beneficial for me, a first-time reader of Tolkien, at all. And then that just continued for the entirety of the book. It was very inaccessible. I didn't enjoy a minute of reading it physically, and so I had to switch to the audiobook, and I put it on like 2 times speed to get through it because I just could not access the world. And that is usually my biggest turnoff on a book. If I have to switch to the audiobook, it's mostly because the world makes no sense or I'm having a hard time conceptualizing or listening to the language. Again, it's a masterpiece. We all know it is. He changed the game for fantasy writing, and the movies are incredible. But I have, short of The Hobbit, I have never read a Tolkien book before, and I don't know if I will again, which I'm sure will be disappointing to a few friends of mine who love him to bits. But I am firmly a Lewis fan, and I think that reason now is cemented because Lewis is much more accessible in his world building, and he wrote it for a younger audience so that both adults and kids could understand it, and I think that's what I appreciate more than all of that dense front-loading of stuff. Again, that's more of a taste thing, not a slight against Tolkien, because we all know that he's a genius. But for me, it just was not my cup of tea. The next 2 are actually thrillers on my list. The first was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, also part of the Elite Eight from Book March Madness. I recently got more into thrillers over the past couple months than I ever have reading, and she was kind of the first one that I had started with, which after talking with several other people who are connoisseurs of the thriller genre, that probably wasn't the best one to start with. So now that I know that, I 100% I'm going to give her another shot. Not that I wasn't before, but it gave me a little more assurance. But The Turn of the Key, I think, was an interesting concept. I didn't like the last third of the book. I thought it was a major letdown. I was able to predict pretty much everything that happened. And I didn't like how everything resolved. So it follows the story. Oh, I don't even remember the main character's name. but she gets hired as a nanny for these girls at this very Victorian era but modern inside house. And as you go along, you sort of realize that this modernized house is haunted, and things are happening, and she's getting creeped out. There are several plot twists about who the family is, and she's trying to figure out what's happening to this house, what are the secrets of this family. There's a weird overgrown garden that's potentially lethal. It takes a lot to surprise me. However, the book did have a pretty massive plot twist in it, which I'm always up for being surprised, and I consider it a job well done if I am completely caught off guard. However, I skimmed the stuff that had happened previously in the book, and that plot twist made no sense at all. It was not cohesive with what I was reading about the book, and partly it's because, a little bit of a spoiler, it was an unreliable narrator situation, but I think something like Girl on the Train, which I also read, is a better type of unreliable narrator, where all along it's that suspense of, I don't know whether to believe you. But in this case, it was a, oh, stab me in the back kind of unreliable narrator that I don't think I was fully on board and fully supporting this main character until whoosh, and it completely ruined the end of the book for me. So it was a big letdown, unfortunately, but I know a lot of people really love Ruth Ware and her other writings, so I'm 100% going to give her another chance and read something that someone else recommends. But I think, again, interesting concept, did not deliver for me. And the next book on my most disappointing list is The Dinner by Herman Koch. I think that's how you say his last name. This was part of Around the World in 325 Days Europe, and it follows the story of a man whose son has been doing some sketchy things, and so he meets up with his wife and his brother and his wife, who also have a son, who've been doing these things together, to discuss the ramifications of their actions. And the book is delivered sections of story by the courses of the dinner that they're having at this fancy restaurant, hence The Dinner. And for a while, that delivery system really worked, and I really liked reading more and more about the main character and his brother and their issues, the tension between the father and son in both families, between the husband and wife in both families. It was rolling along very nicely until like the last 10 chapters, and then it just, I can't even tell you how it ended. And I'm not alone in this thinking, because as soon as I finished it, I was like, what even happened? Again, talk about a out of left field unreliable narrator situation that made no sense. I looked it up on Goodreads and went on other book review places. I looked it up on YouTube. Same thing with the movie. People were so confused by the ending. And there were like 50,000, that's an exaggeration, opinions about what it meant and why things happened the way it did, but it was such a bizarre ending that it completely ruined the rest of the book for me, and I was so disappointed because I really enjoyed the build-up to what was going to be this climax. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we weren't shown much. It was a lot of narration of what was happening, which I probably should have seen that unreliable narrator situation coming had I been paying closer attention, but I was just enjoying myself. I was not picking up the red flag warnings. So that was my fault. Fascinating concept. The ending was what let it down. And then the final book on my most disappointing books of 2021. I think this is gonna break some hearts. It definitely made my mom question my taste in books, but that is A Man Calleduva by Fredrick Backman, or Bachman. I was not expecting to put this book on this list until I finished it, and I kind of knew, ooh, that kind of let me down a little bit. And I think it's mostly because of how the subject of mental illness, depression, and suicide were handled in this book. I think there was a great opportunity to talk about grief in older people and how you continue living after the person you love most has died, and the process of choosing to live rather than commit suicide, which is the main message of this book. I think it was swept under the rug when it became convenient for the plot, and it was never addressed. I don't think that's realistic for someone who genuinely struggles with topics like that. I think it was a missed opportunity, and that altered how I read the book. I definitely cried. I shed many a tear. I enjoyed all the characters in here, and I love the story. I think the concept is great. I just don't think that subject was handled well, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. So that is my own personal opinion as someone who has wrestled with their own situational depression. Thankfully, not anything as extreme as this, but as someone who knows the process of healing and what it means to be able to talk and share and let people in, and the benefits that that can provide for someone in the recovery process, I think it was a missed opportunity. That's not to say this isn't a good book, and I do love Fredrick Backman's writing style. I think his writing style is amazing. It's so acerbic and blunt, and I laughed and I cried, and I really do want to read more of his other work. Like I said, not a mark on him or his method of storytelling. I just think it could have benefited from a moment of honesty from Uva on moving forward. So that's my own opinion. So there we have it. Those are the worst and most disappointing books of 2021. I ended with this video because I just wanted to have that moment of catharsis and move on. I think there's some benefit to being honest about your genuine thoughts and feelings. So I would love to know your genuine thoughts and feelings on these books. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I would love to know why. I genuinely do want to have conversations about why these books were good or bad for you. So, as always, there is no disrespect towards any of the authors. I do know the work that it takes to create something like this, so it is never a reflection on my thoughts of the author. That particular book just didn't sit well with me. So, more power to you. Write and create what you want to write and create. And people will like it or they won't. Good advice for people who want to become an author. So if you enjoyed this video, if you liked this video, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me out, and let me know what you guys want to see. I have some really awesome stuff that's coming in 2022, and I'm really excited to share it with you. It's almost the new year. In a few short days, we will be celebrating 2022. So I hope that you all have had a wonderful holiday season. As always, a huge thank you to the friends and family who have readily supported me along this journey. It truly means the world to me, and I can't wait to see what's on the next page in the new year. Cheers.